But yeah, basically I was elected to the board 2 years ago because I was interested in actually helping out athletes specifically with education. It was something I was very passionate about, and that's what I wanted to help with. So Audrina Lavoie works with the Canadian Sports Centre in Calgary and Vancouver, in Vancouver. And she's a national manager and is in charge of athlete transition. And they had put out a survey. It was an initial survey to kind of gauge where athletes are as far as their transition and education and direction and career. And she had asked that I come and help to take the education portion of that and formulate the questions and calculate the data to kind of give a recommendation on how to approach an educational program. So it was the survey was in two parts. The first part was the challenges of student athletes. So basically we asked, the standard questions. That's if you completely disagree, point was 1. If you agree or disagree, 2. Neutral, 3. Agree, 4. And completely agree, 5. So, am I in front of something? So if you can see here, the questions: academic and career planning are a priority at this stage of my career. I'm certain of which academic program to pursue. It's easy to find time outside of my sport commitments to pursue studies. I balance sport, school, life commitments with ease. Educational institutions offer courses during my off-season, and educational institutions are flexible in accommodating my schedule. So the far left, the two questions are of or having to do with which direction athletes are taking. The middle two are how well athletes are currently balancing their school and life commitments. And the far right, the two are how well athletes perceive their educational facilities to be offering flexible schedules, etc. So now what we did was we took this data and we split it about 10, 15 different ways to kind of say, okay, what's the best way of segregating this data? Do we look at age? Do we look at CSC level? Do we look at winter versus summer, male versus female? And we looked at it a bunch of different ways and kind of said what types of interesting data will pop out at us. The first one is this fancy little chart to give a very painfully obvious conclusion that education institutions are not flexible in accommodating my travel schedule, and I struggle to balance sport, school, and life commitments. There's a high correlation, meaning if you can fix flexibility in schools, obviously athletes will find it easy to find balance between their school and life commitments. So the interesting thing here is that what we actually have is a quantifiable, measurable correlation. So we can now go, if there are budget allocations, and we're looking at, okay, we need to improve school flexibility by, say, 10%, there will be a direct 10% link to how athletes perceive their school life balance. So flexible schools equal well-balanced athletes. Very easy, very obvious, but that popped out. The next and interesting thing here is that we can see 3 is neutral. Anything to the right or above 3 is more negative, meaning most provinces, actually student athletes don't find that they are having an easy time balancing school and life, and they don't find that their educational facilities are accommodating their travel schedules. So what is interesting here is that Quebec is the only province right now that is actually positive of neutral, meaning that the athletes are actually saying, yes, our schools are flexible, and yes, we are finding balance in our school and life. So that's due most likely to Alliance pour l'étude. It's a model that is used in Quebec. It's very effective. They're doing really great things there, and so this was one of the recommendations, is that we develop a closer relationship and actually speak with them to devise a national model around what's happening in Quebec. The other thing that's I'm just obsessed with measuring things and making graphs. I'm sorry, it's a strange fetish. When you look at the top, the top areas of each graph are gray and the bottom are red. The two top gray ones are schools flexibility and the courses offered during the off season. So this is how well our schools are doing. This is how well our athletes feel that our schools are doing. And the bottom two, athlete ease in balancing school and life commitments, and athlete ease in finding the time outside sport to pursue studies. Basically what this says is comparing how well they feel the schools are doing to how well they feel their lives are balanced. And there's 4 that are highlighted here: the University of Regina, University of British Columbia, University of Calgary, and University of Victoria. And basically what you can see is the ratio. So students are saying that The schools are very flexible, very accommodating. They offer things during the off season, and this is how good we feel compared to that. And there are two universities that are really doing a good job in making sure that they're flexible and accommodating, but it's not paying off in allowing students to feel balanced in their life or pursue education. Two, on the other hand, University of Regina and University of British Columbia have a much better ratio. So basically, one of the things is to look at specific schools and have those conversations to understand, does that mean that, maybe there's more varsity teams, more, maybe more customized school programs that need to happen in those specific educational facilities. But bottom line is that those conversations should happen first as we go ahead and develop this national education program. So, explore a few specific schools. Another fancy chart. This is the graduating year. So, people who are graduating in 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017. The dark red indicates the value of priority placed on career and academic planning. I mean, it's very important for me to know where I'm going with my education. The lighter is the level of certainty about which program to choose. So you might feel very confident about, this is where I want to go, but I don't know what types of courses to choose while I'm going through. What this says, if you look on the right-hand side, the distance between those two basically says that for students who are graduating in 2016 and 2017, well, they value where they're going in life, and they're very focused on their career, and they think it's very important, but they don't feel that they have a clear direction in choosing their courses. Meaning, if you're going to create sort of one overarching rule, it would be, and make sure that we're sort of really putting our resources specifically where they're going to be most effective. If we need to hire, say, a specific career advisor, really target athletes who it's their first year in university. So obvious point again, but it's good to at least have some data backing that recommendation. Hands-on guidance is most effective in the first year. Now, the second part, what we did here is we took 4 basic things that we had heard from athletes over the course of the first 6 months that I was on the board, just in conversations and sort of doing mini focus groups, say what are some of the key things and can we prioritize those? So one was flexibility to enroll in part-time or full-time courses schedules based around sporting commitments. The other was having the ability to have a coach or other sport administrator proctor missed exams, access to a dedicated academic advisor to help with course scheduling and other issues, and having the ability to pre-register for courses before general student population to minimize scheduling conflicts with training. Now, the way this works is we had them rank them between 1 and 4, and you had to choose between if I could choose one or the other. So basically, what's 100%, that's what's the most sought after, and compared to that, say, the ability to pre-register is about 85% as important. I don't know if that's a fun fact, but just so we kind of have a gauge for what is most important versus least important. Now, what's interesting is when we split this based on province, we see the exact same thing for the West. We see the most important thing is flexibility to enroll in part-time or full-time courses. Whereas when you get, say, to Ontario, there's actually much more need, or there's almost as much need for the ability to have a coach or other sport administrator proctor missed exams. So the point of this is that whatever national program is in place, it's going to have to be highly customized, and there's really sort of 3 templates that we can use. The West, from the Pacific to Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. Now we can see in Quebec is the only one where flexibility to enroll in part-time or full-time course based around sporting commitments isn't the most important, likely because they already offer that service. So one of the things in Quebec that we should focus on is allowing students to pre-register for courses. So yeah, each province has its own unique needs. Yes? So this was an initial survey that went out. There were 581 athletes. There was a little bit of bias towards primarily undergrad students, but this basically is serving as an initial study to then go into like a deeper study into specifically what these recommendations are. For the most part, yeah, it was undergrad students. We have more precise data, but there's just a lot of it. The sports were, for the most part, I mean,
we had representation across all sport kinds
yeah.
of athletes.
It was right down to provincial.
No, it was all national. The athletes who responded to the survey were athletes registered with the Canadian Sport Institute Network, who are Sport Canada carded athletes. Yeah.
And the last finding here was that most of the needs were again primarily ranked the same when you split this by CSC level. But what you see is that from a provincial development to Canadian development, Canadian elite and podium, that the ability to have a coach or other administrator proctor missed exams during travel is more important at a more developmental level. So that was again one of the findings that we recommended. So on that, these were the key insights and the recommendations from AthletesCAN on this survey. And Audrina has done some unbelievable work this year with getting this off to its initial stage. And with that, I'd like to introduce Audrina Lavoie.
Thank you, Craig, and for your data analysis wizardry, because in all honesty, it's not my forte. So we really appreciated your work on that project. So my name is Audrina. I work for the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific, based in Vancouver. I'm in a new role as of September 2012, where I actually work on behalf of the entire Canadian Sport Institute network, so all 7 institutes across the country. So perhaps by a show of hands, I'm curious to know how many of you are registered with your regional Canadian Sports Centre or Institute? Awesome, okay. So I am going to use the acronym CSI, just because Canadian Sport Institute is very long, but I wanted to ensure that I got that out of the way. So thank you, and great to be back at AthletesCAN Forum. I presented in 2011 alongside a colleague of mine, Dr. Andy Van Nuytgem, on a business report that we wrote on behalf of the Canadian Sport Institute Network looking at the status of athlete career transition programming in Canada. So today, if my slides come up at some point, I'm going to provide an update on where we're at with Canada's Athlete Career Transition Program, which has now been renamed Game Plan, as you can see on the screen here. So just to preface this, we are doing a launch to the sport community this upcoming Tuesday in Calgary at the SPIN Summit. SPIN is a conference held annually by On the Podium for sports science, sport medicine practitioners primarily, along with coaches and NSF representatives. So I wanted to provide a bit of a sneak peek to the athletes here on the new look and feel and, of course, the name of the program. We'll get into that in a bit further along in the presentation here. So in terms of my objectives of this presentation today, I want to start by defining athlete career transition. I think a lot of athletes really steer away from the word transition. I was having a conversation with Aaron about this last night, and I think there's a misunderstanding around what career transition really means. So I want to get into that a bit further, because I think it is important that we all understand the true meaning of career transition. Secondly, I'm going to present some of the background research for those of you that weren't here. Again, show of hands, who was at the 2011 forum? Okay, so not that many of you. So we'll present some of the findings and recommendations from that business report, and more to that, the other debrief report that was done after the 2010 Vancouver Olympic Games that was really the impetus for that business report. Thirdly, I'll provide an update on the evolution of the program. So a year in, what are our current initiatives, future initiatives? We'll speak more to the launch as well as the new name of the program, which is operating under the Canadian Sport Institute. So I should just clarify that. And then lastly, call to action. I want to ensure that you all leave this room knowing what services are available to you at your Canadian Sport Institute or Canadian Sports Centre. I think there, again, is perhaps some miscommunication or not a lot of clarity around what types of services are available to you as a current and retiring athlete. So, without further ado, Let's start with transition. So myth busters here. Career transition is not only about retirement, okay? Athletes experience transitions all along their athletic career. So we use the long-term athlete development pathway, which is the image here at the bottom. Most of you are in the train to compete, training to win, and or active for life stage of the long-term athlete development model. So a few examples that I've included here of career transitions include injury, deselection, relocation, moving from junior to senior team, and childbirth. So how many of you have experienced at least one of these transitions in your career? Okay, so you've all had a career transition, right? Even though for those of you who are not officially retired. So how do athletes adapt to or manage transitions throughout their career? There's a number of factors, and I'm going to delve into some research here. First and foremost, and I think one of the most important factors is the support that we have from our coaches and NSOs. So do our coaches and NSOs value balance between sport and non-sport pursuits, so whether that be career, education, personal development, and otherwise. Secondly, social support, so our family, our friends, our partners. Thirdly, a balanced approach to sport and non-sport pursuits. So in some cases, athletes who are perhaps not pursuing goals outside of sport, or whether that be education, career, and otherwise, tend to have what we call a closed athletic identity. So much of they associate with the role of the athlete, right? Whereas athletes who have more of a balanced approach and are pursuing other goals outside of sport have a more balanced identity. And we do know that athletes with a closed athletic identity do have a more challenging time when it comes to transition. And we all know that transitions can be both predictable and non-predictable. And then lastly, probably the most important factor is the amount of planning and preparation an athlete has done for their life after sport, for their post-sport career. So what are the benefits of career planning? This is all cited by research-based evidence by athletes, I should mention. So reduced burnout resulting from a singular focus on sport. That's pretty evident and straightforward. A reduced anxiety around life after sport. A sense of balance between sport and non-sport pursuits. And this is the most important one. Athletes who live a balanced lifestyle, yet performance-focused, have an overall stronger athletic performance. There is research that has illustrated that, again, athletes who have a balanced approach do perform better. They also stay in the sport longer, and they're retained in the system, and also have a smoother transition away from sport. So, where did this program all start? Post-2010, there was a debrief report that was written by On the Podium. They interviewed approximately 100 athletes, coaches, high-performance directors, and what they were looking to gather was information about what were the key performance factors that impacted games performance. So was it coaching, was it equipment, was it training camps, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a qualitative interview process that was conducted on 3 occasions, so prior to games, immediately after the games, and 3 months post-games. And interestingly, what came from this report that was certainly not anticipated was this recurring theme around life-sport balance during the athletic career and a lack of planning for life after the games. There are direct testimonials from this report of athletes who are saying the night or the eve before their race at the Olympic Games, how they are freaking out, essentially, because they haven't thought about, what am I doing next week? I don't have a plan. That's not what an athlete should be thinking about the night before the biggest race of their life. So that really propagated this discussion amongst all the leaders in the sports system. So what are we doing with career transition? Who's doing what? What do we currently have on offer? And what's being done internationally? So that was really the impetus for the business report that I'd mentioned earlier. So the Canadian Sports Centre Network, we wrote a business report. So we looked at internally here in Canada, what is currently available to high-performance athletes in the area of athlete career transition. And then we looked internationally. We looked at world-leading countries like Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and the US. And we looked at their programs and the programs that they've had in place for, in some cases, over 20 years. So in terms of the findings of the report, this is just a few of them. Firstly, that there is an inconsistent delivery of services across the network. And I'm speaking very specifically to the Canadian Sports Centre Network here. Secondly, the programming has been very reactive, so it's all post-games and crisis. Let's throw a 3-day workshop right after the games and try to help athletes figure out what they want to do. That's not the right time. Thirdly, lack of qualified and dedicated providers. So many of the people in the centers and institutes who have this as part of their portfolio are administrators. They don't have background necessarily in career development, transition, or counseling. So they're not in a position to necessarily work with athletes in this capacity. Fourth, lack of prioritized and dedicated funding, right? So a lot of the funding is being put elsewhere to whether it's sports science, sport medicine, so on and so forth. Fragmented and ineffective partnerships, and this is more from a sports system perspective. So many different organizations providing some career transition support, but not necessarily in an integrated or cohesive fashion. And then lastly, due to all of these factors, we have low stakeholder engagement, meaning athletes aren't buying in, coaches aren't buying in because they don't know where to get the service and they don't know how. So that was our findings in sum. So the recommendations, the Canadian Sport Institute Network has committed to developing a nationally standardized athlete career transition program. So that was the first step. Secondly, we, after looking again at some of the gaps in comparison to international programs, we know we need to move towards a more proactive and integrated approach when providing these types of services to athletes. So as opposed to when an athlete retires and after the games, it's something that an athlete is working on for 8 years out of retirement. Hire dedicated and qualified providers, so people who have the skills, experience, and knowledge to really be effective in a role such as this. Of course, prioritize and protected funding, that's really critical, and to streamline and build effective partnerships, not just in the sport community, but building off of Craig's presentation earlier with the educational sector, with the corporate sector. There's a lot of opportunity to leverage partnerships. And then lastly, every sport, every athlete has different needs when it comes to career transition throughout their athletic career. This program cannot be cookie cutter, one size fits all. Every athlete is going to come to the table with very unique needs, and therefore the program does need to be customized and highly individualized in that regard. All right, switching gears, so game plan. Now we're in the year 1 of the program. I should mention that the program is a partnership between the 7 Canadian Sport Institutes with the support of the Canadian Paralympic Committee and the Canadian Olympic Committee. So already that's a huge step forward in terms of bringing multiple partners together to really lead the development of this program. So I'm going to touch on the vision, the drivers of the program, the short and long-term objectives of the program, eligibility, and service delivery. How am I doing for time? Just want to check in here. Anybody? All right. Perfect. All right. Okay, so vision of game plan. To enhance the personal development of Canada's elite athletes by providing expert-based resources and insight that athletes need to transition into, within, and beyond their sporting careers. So right there we're touching on it's not just the retirement piece, it's the within and beyond. The drivers of the program. This program is going to be a performance-enhancing service, right? So really trying to get away from the old age definition of transition, and that it's just about retirement, and that is going to take away from performance. Again, we know research evidence has shown that athletes that do have a balanced lifestyle perform better. We know this anecdotally, but now there's a lot more research internationally that's being done in this area, which is really helpful when we're talking with coaches and sports scientists particularly. Expert-driven, so making sure that the resources and the people and the programs that we have in place are expert-driven. Empowerment, this is a really important piece. Athletes need to be empowered to take responsibility and accountability of their own career planning process. We need to get away from some of the hand-holding that's been taking place up until this point. We really think it's important that athletes develop some of those life skills so that they can be successful when they leave sport. Partnerships, so again, just to my earlier points about streamlining and coming together and working in a more integrated fashion as partners in the Canadian sports system. Engagement, so engaging athletes, coaches, sports science, sport medicine providers, all of the key people that are working in and around the athlete in the daily training environment. And then lastly, innovative. Yes, there are other countries that have been offering similar programs for years, and we can adapt some of those some of those aspects of those programs, but we really need to make sure that it fits within the cultural context of the Canadian system. Objectives. So phase one, and I'll say phase one is a 2-year phase starting last September 2012. So our first goal is to increase program awareness, or even just awareness of career transition in general. To my point earlier on, there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding around the word career transition and that this is just about retirement. That's not at all the case. Secondly, looking internally within the network of Canadian Sport Institutes, we're doing a lot of great things in pockets. So what can we do to share and standardize some of the existing programs and services? We don't want to reinvent the wheel or recreate, but what can we do internally to ensure that there is a quality level of services and programs available across all 7 institutes? Hire qualified and dedicated advisors. This was a really important piece for us this year, was to look at what are the competencies, what makes up this person who's going to be helping an athlete. Are they a life coach? Are they a counselor? Are they a guidance counselor? Are they a sports psychologist? What does that look like? And it was really helpful to look at what is being done internationally in that regard, and certainly the competencies for an athlete life advisor in New Zealand would be similar to what we would be looking for here in Canada. So we built out a hiring strategy and looked at what would those key competencies be for an advisor. Develop resources based on stakeholder input. There's no point in developing, all of these resources unless it's actually going to meet the needs of athletes. So part of the reason why we did the survey this year, we didn't ask athletes to rate the quality of the sports psych session they had last year. We wanted to know moving forward, what are the key needs? Like, where are the gaps for you right now? And start to build out programs, resources, and so forth based on that information. Here, develop a Canadian professional training program for career transition advisors. This exists in many other countries already. We know there's an industry gap in terms of people who have experience in high performance sport, counseling, and career development. It's very, very rare. So we are looking at opportunities to upskill and provide professional development to individuals who may be pursuing a career in this area. So not really pertinent to this group here, but I did want to share that with you as well. And one of our metrics this year is to ensure that 25% of Sport Canada carded athletes who are registered with the Canadian Sport Institute Network access individualized service with a career transition advisor. So I'll touch on that in just a minute. So objectives 2, these are more of our long-term kind of strategic objectives. So paradigm shift in Canada, viewing this service, game plan, career transition, whichever you want to call it, as a performance-enhancing service and as part of an integrated approach within the daily training environment. So working alongside the mental, the sports psych, the dietitian, the physiotherapist, the physiologist, et cetera. Build out the capacity to provide individual career advising support to every carded athlete in Canada. There are close to 1,800 carded athletes. We are looking with these advisors that they will only have a caseload of between 120 and 150 athletes, given that we want to ensure that there's a quality approach to working with these athletes. So that means we have to hire a significant number of staff over the course of the next 5 years in order to meet that demand. And then lastly, this is again more of a strategic objective, is that we know athletes who have a negative transition away from sport are less likely to re-engage in the sports system after they leave sport. Right? So in terms of return on investment, there's a lot of investment put into high-performance sport in Canada. We want to ensure that athletes continue to be involved in sport. And of course, AthletesCAN has a huge role in that. But we want to ensure that, whether it's coaching, volunteering, administration, that athletes want to remain and have an active role in the Canadian sports system. So eligibility, athlete criteria. So here, with regards to the program, I'm just going to take a quick step back because, as I said, we are in a very initial stage of implementing this program. And therefore, there is somewhat of an individual and a sport-based stream to how this program is going to roll out. So currently, athletes that are registered with their institute or center have access to many career transition services. Whether you're aware of it or not, they exist, and I'll touch on them on the very last slide. So in order to access those services, any Sport Canada carded athlete, active, current, as well as, this is a new policy change as of this year, we've decided as a network to move ahead with providing any Sport Canada carded athlete who's been retired in the last 5 years with career transition services and support. Okay? Because we also know that many athletes don't really face, or some face a very challenging time 2 years out. That's supported through some research as well. So we want to ensure that within that 5 years post-retirement that athletes can still access some of the, whether it's career counseling, whether it's transition support, attend different networking events, workshops, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of the sport criteria, so we are looking to pilot with a few key sports where we will be more deeply integrated and using a proactive approach. So the advisor will be working within the sport, within the IST, integrated support team, and working directly with those athletes in more of a proactive manner. So the selection of those sports is based on OTP, summer and winter sports, and national priorities. Service delivery, so I may have already touched on some of this. Of course, we're needing to hire these career advisors within the Canadian Sport Institute. Secondly, the service or the game plan needs to be integrated as part of the NSO's annual training plan. So if we're going to implement a more proactive approach to providing the service to athletes, it needs to be done in an integrated and planned fashion. So the competencies of the advisor, I want to touch on this quickly because I'm going to be introducing our new advisor in just a moment. Most important, they need to understand the high-performance environment and the needs of Canadian athletes. That's very, very, very important. Secondly, they need to have a background in career development or career transition in order to be really effective in supporting an athlete through their career planning process. And then lastly, they need to have foundational counseling skills in order to build a relationship, build rapport with athletes. So on that note, I'm actually going to introduce our newest member of the team, Athlete Career Transition Advisor, based here at Canadian Sport Institute, Ontario in Toronto. He just started last week, so I'm sure it's been a busy first week for him, but I'm just going to have him come up and speak briefly about his background as an athlete, about his educational background, and some of the work that he's done down at Temple University, where he completed his PhD in sports psychology. So I'll just have Rolf come up to the stage quickly. Rolf Wagschall. It's a hard one.
Thank you, and thanks, Andréanne, for the brief introduction. So, just to introduce myself, my name's Rolf Wagschall, and I just started 5 days ago, so I'm still getting to know kind of the ins and outs of the Canadian sport system. I have every confidence that I'll pick it up pretty quickly, but at the same time, I do feel pretty confident that I've got a pretty good idea of kind of the needs that this type of position is going to require. So just a bit of a background about myself and some of the work that I've done. A lot of my background educationally is in sports psychology. And as I started my graduate programming, I tried to maintain a very, very strong applied focus. I have a lot of friends who went into research and spent a lot of time in the lab analyzing numbers. That really wasn't for me. I wanted to be out there working with athletes as a former athlete myself, and a current amateur athlete. I really wanted to be out there and applying the things that I was learning in school. So to that end, I really sought out those programs that allowed me to do that. And I really got to do a lot of that at Temple University as I was finishing my PhD. So a couple interesting initiatives I was able to engage in. One was I was able to take part in what's referred to as the CHAMPS Life Skills Program, which is a nationally mandated program by the NC2A. And it's basically aimed at giving athletes some foundational life skills that they might not have been exposed to either in high school or that they might not just be aware of. So it really ranged the topics that we presented on as far as, gambling awareness and knowing why, as a collegiate athlete, why that might not be the best idea. Anybody who follows college football knows that there's a bit of excitement going on around, I guess who does he play for? Texas A&M, Johnny Football. So there's some programs aimed at, understanding why you shouldn't be gambling or charging people for autographs. There are more basic types of things as far as sexual responsibility, how to manage your time. And then there's also some more focused programs more in line with my own training, such as goal setting and team building, and just kind of getting used to the idea of being a high-performance athlete in a collegiate context. And in addition to that work, that work was really aimed at kind of opening the door and starting conversations with collegiate athletes, kind of exposing them to some of the resources that were available to them as high-performance athletes. And that's kind of what we want to do with this game plan program, and it's part of what we're doing here. We want to start to kind of make you guys aware of, what resources are available, kind of open the door to those conversations, and really start that process of providing these services to you as athletes. The other thing that was really helpful for me, and I think is really going to be a big asset for me as I start to come into this position and start to work with you all, hopefully, is a lot of the work that I did with a couple of the teams. Specifically, I worked with the fencing team and the rowing team at Temple University. And what this gave me was a really strong foundation in what it takes on a day-to-day basis to work with high-performance athletes. You have people coming in and they're spending 20 hours a week mandated by their coaches on their sport, in addition to managing a full course load, in addition to trying to maintain some type of social life. And it's a very, very tricky balancing act, as I'm sure you all know. So I was really, really fortunate in that through the length of my graduate training, I basically was able to see an entire cohort go through from freshman year to graduating as seniors. So I got to see basically a micro athletic life cycle take place. I got to see them coming in as, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed freshmen, not knowing the first thing about what's expected of them, not knowing what study hall is, where to buy their books, how to manage themselves. For a lot of these athletes, it was their first time living away from home. And really help them with that initial kind of entering transition, kind of getting them up to speed as far as getting used to not just being a collegiate athlete, but in a lot of cases, you have these athletes who are coming in, formerly big fish in small ponds, and now they're in a much, much bigger pond, and kind of getting them used to that, getting them comfortable with that, so that they don't have to worry about going to study hall or studying. They're able to, giving them those foundational skills, giving them those foundational skills so they can focus on their studies and they can focus on their athletics, and they're able to establish that appropriate balance. And then as they get settled in, working with athletes with those things that necessarily come up. Burnout is a big problem as far as just getting used to the grind, studying and training every single day, every week for that school year. You get to January, February, and people are starting to drag, and really helping athletes kind of work through that and stay focused and stay energized. Helping athletes get through injuries, which again are a necessary part of what we do, and kind of helping them manage that. And then as they approach seniority and as they approach graduation, kind of getting them thinking about, okay, well, what is life going to look like after, not necessarily sport, but after collegiate sport? What am I going to do professionally? What am I going to do athletically? What are my goals? What are my interests beyond what happened in these last 4 years? So I spent a lot of time working within that athletic life cycle and really counseling athletes, not just from a sports psychology and mental performance standpoint, but just from a counseling standpoint, and getting athletes to kind of understand where they were going, what they wanted to do, and like Andrea, empower them to kind of seek out solutions for themselves. So that was really, really important for me, not just professionally and rewarding professionally, but I think it really gave me a strong foundation with which to prepare for a role like this. So I'm really, really excited to be starting here. And with game plan, the idea is really to kind of put the tools in your own hands, rather than just kind of having you not quite understanding what the next step is, really to provide a resource for you, to empower you to kind of take that next step on your own. Because, it's one of those things where a lot of times in your athletic careers, you get to choose what events, by and large, you want to compete in. But not everyone necessarily gets to choose when, why, or how they might exit their sport or enter a different level of competition. So we really want to be there as a resource and to support you. We want to make sure that you have a plan in place so that no matter what, it's just one less thing that you all have to worry about. It's one less thing on your mind so that you can really focus on whatever it is that you happen to be focusing on. If you're in school, then you're focused on school and you've got a game plan for athletics. If you're competing and you're away from school, you still have a game plan to take care of whatever other responsibilities you have. So really acting as a resource for you. And I'm able to relate to that, not just professionally due to my training and my experiences, but also personally. I have a strong background in athletics. I spent a lot of time competing in sailing, spent some time with the national team. So, I was really, really fortunate in that towards the end of my own competitive career, I had a plan in place, just that it was something that I was interested in as far as pursuing an education in sports psychology and a career there. So I had a plan in place. I was able to pursue that, and I was really, really lucky in that regard. But at the same time, having a plan in place isn't everything. You know, there's always going to be that moment, and I know it was a moment for me, that first Olympic Games after I left my sport, and watching my friends compete and kind of seeing them in that the parade of athletes, that was tough. So with game plan, it's not just about giving you a plan in place, but it's also about giving you a sounding board and kind of that support system that you might not have after you leave sport, and allowing you to kind of work through and really kind of achieve whatever potential you're trying to achieve, whether it's in athletics, whether it's professionally, personally, and really provide you with a resource there. So I hope that gives you a better of an understanding of where I'm coming from and how I might fit in. And like I said, I'm really, really looking forward to working with you all and starting this program and really seeing it progress and evolve into something that's really, really useful for you as athletes.
Thank you, Rolf. That was impressive. So, closing here. Oh, yeah, got 10 minutes, perfect. We're going to have some time for Q&A as well. So I wanted to touch on some of the services that are currently available through your respective institutes and/or centers. So starting from the top, there are referrals available for career and personal counseling. In some cases, the center or institute may have someone who provides that service directly, but in most cases, it is an external referral paid for by the institute or center. Career exploration and planning support and/or resources. Employment support, so job placement programs. Again, these will vary to a degree across the network, so do ensure that you check in with your center or institute to learn more about the services available. Workshops and conferences, of course, are offered on a myriad of topics, so whether it be public speaking, media training, career planning, building your personal brand, et cetera, et cetera. Networking opportunities and events. Academic support, so both tutorial and academic advising referrals. Financial planning and advising referrals, and then info on tuition, relocation, and retirement assistance program, which are all, of course, Sport Canada program and services. So lastly here, if you don't already have the contact information for your athlete services manager at your institute or center, feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to put you in touch. So with that all being said, I just wanted to make one last comment about the name Game Plan. It is somewhat still under wraps in that we are going to be doing more of a public, larger scale launch in 2014, but we did want to ensure that as we are technically open for business, that athletes know the appropriate name for the program, and more importantly, that you know what types of services, programs, and people are available to support you. So, with that all being said, I'm now ready to take any questions from the floor.
Rosanna, water polo. I wanted to know what foundational counseling skills means as a requirement to work with the program.
Yes, so I can certainly answer that question. So, graduate level courses in counseling.
Hi, I'm Goldie from Karate. I was carded from 2010 to 2012. Before that, my coach was carded from 2006 to 2008. When she was carded, I don't know if it was from the Sports Center of Institute, but I'm pretty sure it was the only one that was offering services such as sports psych, physio, and unlimited training sessions. Then when I was carded, everything got cut off, and the Sports Center of Institute was only offering a certain amount. I'm in Ontario,
Okay.
so we have a credit-based kind of thing going where you have 12 credits for the whole cycle, and it's like 3 credits for massage and 6 credits for sports psych, and you have to be approved for that. And I was wondering why we went about this system, because I'm in a combat sport, and sometimes sports psych is more necessary. Whereas, like, my friends from like Iran or US, they have like unlimited amount of sports psychology, and I find that it's kind of, for Canada to be not offering that to these athletes, it's.
Well, I'll try to. Yes. Well, I just want to make one comment first. This program is not sports psychology. Just want to make that very, very clear. Even though Rolf does have a background in sports psychology, he will not be acting in a role as a sports psychology consultant. Just want to make that very, very clear.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Jennifer Stairs. I'm also new at Canadian Sport Institute, Ontario. I'm the Athlete Services Manager, I guess there. It's a slightly different title now. But in regards to that program, I don't know what the past history with the program was. I know at one point they did provide more funding than they do now. The issue we're having with that program right now is that the budget that we have for that, it's sort of for any Sport Canada carded athletes that basically are looking for some of the extra services like sports psych and such. You're all right, it is a credit system. So you have 12 credits. Things like massage that we have great sort of deals on with certain service providers, it's only 1 credit. So sports psych is 2, and you do max out at about $500 annually. But anyone who has questions about that program, you can certainly talk to me. The issue with our budget right now is it hasn't changed since the program started, like I think it was 9 years ago or something like that. So we have 4 times the athletes. So it's just a matter of, so that was why it's sort of, we had to make a cutoff, because if we actually spent that much on all the athletes that are registered, we'd be very over budget. So, but I can certainly give my information to AthletesCAN and stuff and have that available. So anyone who has any questions, I know it is also Ontario specific, that program. So that ability to access service providers that aren't necessarily exactly within our institute. So yeah, I'll give that information to you.
I just have a quick question. There was an announcement that Eric from diving, that the Canadian Sports Centers were repositioned as Canadian Sport Institute. I wonder if either of you could comment to that and what it means.
Yeah, it's so complicated. That's why I kept referring to the network of Canadian Sport Institutes. So of the 7 former Canadian Sports Centers, 4 have transitioned to an institute status, and that has been given to them by Own the Podium and Sport Canada. I can't get into further detail as to the criteria or why they went through the name change, but essentially it was a process in collaboration with Own the Podium and Sport Canada. The Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Atlantic have remained as Canadian Sports Centers due to a lower number of national team athletes that are training in those facilities.
Okay, thanks. Josh?
Josh from Bocce. Audrina, the game plan looks really solid. My question is, let's say an athlete enters the program and says, my goal is to become a lawyer. Then, so is the advice and support given, okay, here are some potential undergrads that you can take at university, or then you have to go on to get your professional degree after that, and so on. How would it work in a process that might take 10 or 7 years?
With the new advisor roles, they will play a number of or will have varied experience. So one of the key tasks that they'll be undertaking in the first year is to build relationships and partnerships within their respective communities. So whether that be with universities, colleges, other corporate sector, employers, etc. Knowing that this person can't be everything to everybody, but to have a referral network of providers and contacts that they can then refer that athlete to. I hope that answers your question.
Just to add to that a little bit, it kind of goes back to the idea of empowerment. And the idea is, let's say, training for a law degree might be a 7-year process. The idea is to work with the athletes in perhaps the first 1 or 2 of those years and give them a foundation of the skills that they need to progress as they enter that educational track. So what do they need to be aware of as far as seeking out programs, managing their time, adjusting to life as a student, all those life skills that they're going to need as they progress. So it's not necessarily holding the athlete's hand as they continue down that educational track so much as it is giving them those foundational skills from the outset so that they can transition away from working with someone like myself.
Thank you, Ralph.
Jeannie, weightlifting. I'm just curious about athletes that do not live near a center or an institute, how they'll be helped.
Just like all of the other services that are provided through the institutes and centers, so that it really does depend on the institute or center. So I'll use BC as an example. We only provide direct services to athletes that are Whistler, Vancouver, and Victoria campus. in terms of performance services, and this is going to fall under performance services. Whereas in some of the other centres, Ontario, for example, they have a number of external service providers. That's yet to be discussed. Evidently, Rolf is going to be based here in Ontario, in Toronto, but will be doing some outreach in some of the neighboring communities where there is, a mass of athletes.
So there's no chance of doing this via Skype or anything if you were from, say, a territory? For
Potentially, I think, and we had discussed this earlier, I think in terms of any initial meeting you have with an athlete as a service provider, ideally face-to-face is always best, but I think there, potentially can be some flexibility in terms of, especially when athletes are traveling and are out of the country, that they can follow up with their advisor. But of course, our preference would be to have the athlete come in and register with the Institute and have that initial intake with the advisor.
So, Audrina, just to reiterate what you've probably already said and that maybe I missed, is the key deliverable here, the tangible, is the relationship with Rolf. Is that it?
Absolutely. So where we're coming from is, in the past, Canada, we've had a lot of great programs. I would say in the early 90s, we were viewed internationally as being world leading when the COC had the athlete career program. But really since then, we've been lagging behind other countries. These package structured programs aren't necessarily going to work for all athletes across the spectrum. So we've really looked, again, internationally at what's being done in other countries. I'll use Australia as an example quickly. So their program, Athlete Career Education, acronym ACE, has been around for over 20 years. They employ close to 35 full-time advisors who work across the state and institutes of sport. So that just gives you an idea of the scale of that program, and certainly in the first year they probably only had 1 or 2 people in place, but it grew from there, and of course the value and engagement within the sport community has allowed it to evolve as such.
So what about things like the advanced scheduling or proximity or access to universities, or does that tie in? Is there buy-in from other partners that help bring that game plan, that path to fruition? And Rolf, you spoke specifically about your experience at an NC2A institution. I also went to school in the NC2A, as did a handful of other athletes here. And you walk in and it's like 1, 2. Audrina went to Florida State.
Yeah.
Seminoles, LSU. I won't go there.
Don't knock the Seminoles.
So the point being there is, yes, you've got an advisor that's helping you schedule your courses, but you've got advanced priority classes, you've got access to physio. I guess that piece is the Sport Institute. But
well, we would, as part of this program, in terms of a long-term objective, is to build partnerships with educational sectors so that we can deliver some of the services that Craig had outlined in his presentation. We know Australia is doing a phenomenal job at that with their elite athlete-friendly university network, where all of the universities across Australia provide athletes with transferability of courses, with pre-registration, flexible education opportunities, and whatnot. So it's going to be a bit tricky here in Canada, just given that all educational institutions are, for the most part, funded provincially. Therefore, I don't have an easy answer for you, but it's definitely on the radar, and it's something that Craig is very passionate about, and we know there's a definite need outside of the varsity sport athletes, because we have to understand those are 2 very different groups, and varsity athletes are getting access to many of those services, at the UBCs and the UVics and the UFCs of the world, but national team, Olympic and Paralympic athletes don't get access to any of those services unless they're on a varsity team. So that's kind of where the breakdown's happening.
Thanks.
Laura Johnston, formerly with racquetball, and also a long time ago, an athlete services manager with Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic. So just another hat. And something we have now are, technology. So when you're talking about being able to meet with athletes and proximity, I'm just wondering if you've really been exploring the use of, corporate coaches use, whether it's phone or a lot of athletes would have FaceTime or Skype or any other number of ways that you could be communicating and coaching athletes. So I'm just wondering why the restriction on their proximity, or if you could explore how you can use technology to do this coaching for those athletes who aren't located close by.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I agree wholeheartedly. The framework that we're trying to implement here is to be more integrated within the sport itself, so within the NSO. Now, we know that's not going to be the case with many of our individual athletes, so in which case we will have to take a different approach. And we haven't explored all of those options at this stage, but certainly as we continue to roll this out, and given that we've only just hired our first advisor here, I should actually mention we also just recently hired an advisor based out of Pacific, so based in Victoria, who will be working with a few key sports there. So really we're trying to come away from certainly there'll be an individualized approach, but we want to make sure that this is integrated within the daily training environment, which requires us to be in a facility where athletes are training.
One last question before we move on.
Kim Donaldson, Rugby. Just quickly, you had mentioned those two documents, the one you worked on and then the 2010 OTP document. Are those available somewhere?
The OTP debrief report is an internal and confidential document. I haven't even seen it. It was authored by Dr. Kirsten Barnes, who works at the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific, so she has shared some of that information with us, as they have with all of the staff and high-performance directors after 2010. So that's where we were able to gather that information. In terms of the business report, it has up until this point been an internal document. We can certainly share perhaps like the executive summary and the recommendations, but otherwise some of the information is, we wouldn't house it on any website per se, just due to intellectual property reasons, but we can certainly share some high-level information from that report if that would be helpful.
Yeah, our Players Committee actually has been working towards putting together something like this for rugby, and so it's actually really nice to see this. You've done a much better job than we just kind of started to. It's a lot more concise and organized. That we were kind of starting to look at it as a deselection process, and kind of working on that initial relocation to centralization, looking at those transitions in a separate context, but definitely we've been talking about all those issues, so having access to something like that would be really helpful for us in presenting that to our board.
Yeah. And Andrea Burke and I have met several times, so she's very up to speed on this. Yeah. Great.
Awesome.
Any more tough questions?
Anything you'd like to finish with?
All good. I just wanted to thank everyone again for inviting me back and providing me with the opportunity to share an update with you on the program. And of course, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of the conference.
And I'll just reiterate what Audrina said, that this actually, the formal launch of this isn't until Tuesday. So this is the sneak a peek. And so it is really under wraps. If you could just, hold off talking about it and sharing that until after Tuesday.
Yeah.
That'd be great. So thank you very much for coming to share that with us. And sure we have and Andriane will be around for another hour or so.